I stood at the altar in my white dress, surrounded by 500 strangers who'd come to witness what should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, I watched my new mother-in-law destroy it with a champagne glass and a smile that could freeze hell. My name is Lucy, and I learned the hard way that some people will wait until you're at your highest point before they push you off the cliff. To the happy couple, Victoria said, her voice carrying across the reception hall like a blade wrapped in silk. Though I must admit, when Daniel first told me about the charming little florist he'd met in that quaint town, I assumed it was just another of his charitable phases. The room rippled with uncomfortable laughter. Daniel's hand tightened around mine, but he said nothing, always saying nothing when it came to his mother. But here we are, she continued, swirling her champagne, a testament to how love truly knows no social boundaries. Though I do wonder if Daniel realizes that running a multi-million-dollar tech company requires more than just a pretty face at home arranging daisies. Elena, my best friend, shifted in her bridesmaid dress beside me. I could feel her rage without even looking. My parents sat at their table, Mom's face flushed with anger, Dad's hands clenched around his napkin. To Lucy! Victoria raised her glass higher, her diamond bracelet catching the light. May you eventually prove yourself worthy of the Brookside name, though I suspect that might be as likely as finding Cartier in a corner shop. The silence that followed was deafening. 500 people holding their breath, waiting to see if the bride would crack. I didn't. Instead, I smiled directly at Victoria, lifted my own glass, and took a slow sip. The champagne tasted like acid. Thank you for those heartfelt words, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. It's touching to see how much you care about Daniel's happiness. Victoria's perfectly painted lips twitched. She hadn't expected me to respond. Robert, Daniel's father, suddenly stood up. I'd like to make a toast as well, he announced, his voice warm and genuine. To Lucy, who brings more grace, kindness, and authenticity to this family than we probably deserve. Victoria's face darkened. She'd divorced Robert 3 years ago, and his support of me was just another reason for her to sharpen her knives. The reception continued, a blur of faces and forced smiles. I danced with Daniel, who whispered apologies in my ear that meant nothing because they changed nothing. I hugged my parents, who tried to hide their concern behind proud smiles. I cut the cake, posed for photos, and played the role of the happy bride while Victoria held court among her society friends, occasionally shooting triumphant glances my way. It wasn't until later, in the quiet of the hotel bathroom, that Elena found me staring at my reflection. We should poison her tea, she said, only half joking. That would be too quick, I replied, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. She'd never learn anything from that. Elena studied me in the mirror. What are you thinking? I touched the pearl necklace Victoria had given me that morning. A family heirloom, she'd said, probably lying, and felt something shift inside me. A hardening, like sap, crystallizing into amber. I'm thinking that she's right about one thing, I said. Social boundaries don't matter anymore. Neither does being worthy of the Brookside name. But she's wrong about everything else, and I'm going to spend every day proving it. Lucy, Elena's voice held a note of warning. Don't worry, I smiled, and it felt different than any smile I'd ever worn before. I'm not going to do anything dramatic. I'm just going to give Victoria exactly what she wants. A daughter-in-law who learns to play her game. And then I'm going to play it better than she ever has. The music from the reception filtered through the walls, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to another life. In a way, it did. Because the Lucy who walked down the aisle this morning died somewhere between Victoria's first toast and her last smirk. And I had a feeling Victoria would soon wish she'd left her buried. The honeymoon lasted exactly 3 days before Victoria's first strike. I was arranging peonies in our new kitchen when Daniel's phone buzzed with her message. She'd scheduled a private dinner for us at Le Blanc, Brookside's most exclusive restaurant. We should go, Daniel said, his fingers drumming against the marble counter. She's trying, Lucy, in her own way. I sliced through a stem with more force than necessary. Like she tried at the wedding? The silence that followed was heavy with all the things he wouldn't say. I watched him adjust his tie, a nervous habit he'd picked up from his father, and wondered if he knew how much he looked like Robert when he was uncomfortable. The restaurant was all crystal and candlelight, with tables spaced far enough apart to ensure privacy for the kinds of conversations that shaped Brookside's social hierarchy. Victoria sat like a queen holding court, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage. "Darling," she air-kissed Daniel's cheeks before turning to me. "Lucy, that's a creative choice of outfit for LeBlanc." I smiled, smoothing my deliberately chosen floral dress. "Thank you. I thought about wearing something more formal, but then I remembered what you said about social boundaries not mattering anymore." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Before she could respond, Robert appeared behind her chair. "Hope you don't mind me joining," he said, pulling up a seat. "I was in the neighborhood." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tightened around her wineglass. "Robert, what a surprise. I wasn't aware you still frequented LeBlanc after the incident." "Oh, they've forgiven me for that scene you caused during the divorce," he replied pleasantly. "Amazing what telling the truth can do for one's reputation." I watched the exchange like a tennis match, noting how Victoria's jaw clenched at the word truth. There was history here, buried beneath years of polite venom. "Speaking of reputations," Victoria turned back to me, "I heard the most fascinating thing about your flower shop. Apparently there was some trouble with the health department last year." Daniel's head snapped up. "Mother, oh, that," I cut in smoothly. "A competitor filed a false complaint. It was cleared up quickly, though the timing was interesting. Right after I started dating Daniel, wasn't it?" Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or warning. "How unfortunate," she said. "One can never be too careful with these things. Reputation is everything in Brookside. Wouldn't you agree, Robert?" "Depends on whose version of the truth you're believing," he replied, and I noticed how Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine. The rest of dinner was a masterclass in subtle warfare. Every compliment Victoria gave carried a hidden barb, every question concealed an accusation. But it was what happened as we were leaving that truly opened my eyes. "Marcus asked about you," Robert said quietly to Victoria as we gathered our coats. "He's doing better in rehab this time." Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment. "I told you never to mention his name to me. He's still your son." "He's nothing to me," she hissed, then quickly smoothed her expression as other diners glanced our way. "Daniel, darling, don't forget about the charity gala next week. Lucy, do try to wear something appropriate." As we walked to our car, I caught Robert watching Victoria's retreating figure with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Who's Marcus?" I asked. Robert turned to me, considering. "Victoria's greatest failure, and maybe your greatest advantage, if you're planning what I think you're planning." "I don't know what you mean." He smiled sadly. "Yes, you do. Just remember, Victoria didn't become who she is overnight, and neither will you if you're not careful." That night, lying beside Daniel in our new bed, I opened my laptop and searched for information about Marcus. What I found made my breath catch. Newspaper articles about overdoses, rehab stays, and a mother who'd publicly disowned her oldest son to protect her social standing. I thought about Victoria's trembling hand at dinner, the crack in her armor at the mention of Marcus's name. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not just as my enemy, but as someone who'd sacrificed everything, even her own child, at the altar of reputation, and I knew exactly where to aim my first real blow. Finding Marcus wasn't difficult. The rehab center sat on the outskirts of Brookside, hidden behind manicured hedges and discreet security. What surprised me was how easily he agreed to meet. "You're braver than I expected," Marcus said, studying me across the visitor room table. He had Victoria's sharp features, but Robert's kind eyes. "Most people in this family prefer pretending I don't exist. I'm not most people in this family." "No," he smiled faintly. "You're the florist who married my brother and pissed off our mother. I've been following the drama from afar." I placed the envelope I'd brought on the table. "These are from your father, letters Victoria intercepted. He's been writing to you for years." His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The silence stretched as he read, his face growing paler with each page. "She told me he never responded to my calls," Marcus finally said, his voice rough, that he'd washed his hands of me after the overdose. Victoria tells a lot of stories. Why are you showing me this now? I considered my words carefully, because I need to understand who I'm dealing with, and because you deserve to know the truth. Marcus leaned back, something shifting in his expression. Ah, so that's what this is. You're looking for ammunition, aren't you? I used to be. Then I realized hating Victoria was just another kind of addiction. He tapped the letters. But these change things. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Victoria burst through the door, her usual composure fractured by rage. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed at me, then turned to Marcus. "And you, how dare you speak to her?" "Hello, Mother," Marcus said quietly. "We were just discussing family history. Want to join us?" Victoria's face went white as she spotted the letters. "Where did you get those?" "Your old study," I answered. "The false bottom in the desk drawer. Robert told me where to look." "You had no right." "Like you had no right to keep a father from his son?" I stood, feeling strangely calm. "Or to tell Daniel that Marcus stole from the family trust when it was you who—" "Enough!" Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Marcus, whatever she's told you, save it," he interrupted. "For once in your life, just stop lying." Victoria drew herself up, armor sliding back into place. "I've done everything to protect this family's reputation. Everything to ensure Daniel didn't follow your path. And now you're both trying to destroy everything I've built?" "No, Mother," Marcus said. "You're doing that all on your own." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right? We heard raised voices." "Everything's fine," I said, gathering my purse. "Mrs. Brookside was just leaving." Victoria grabbed my arm as I passed. "You have no idea what you're starting," she whispered. I met her gaze steadily. "Actually, I do. I learned from the best." Later that night, I found Daniel in his home office, staring at his phone. "Marcus called me," he said without looking up. "First time in 3 years. He told me about the letters, about what Mother did." I waited, heart pounding. "Why didn't you tell me what you were planning? Would you have tried to stop me?" He finally looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. "I don't know, but I deserve to know the truth about my brother. Like I deserved a mother-in-law who didn't try to destroy me at my own wedding?" Daniel flinched. "Lucy, your mother's been playing this game for decades, Daniel. Manipulating, lying, destroying anyone who threatens her control. I'm just learning the rules. And what happens when you become as good at it as she is?" The question hit harder than I expected. I thought about Marcus's words about hatred being another kind of addiction. My phone buzzed, a message from Robert. "Victoria's calling an emergency family meeting tomorrow. She's bringing lawyers." I showed Daniel the message. His jaw tightened. "Whatever happens tomorrow," I said, "I need to know where you stand." He was quiet for a long moment. "I stand with the truth," he finally said, "whatever that turns out to be." I nodded and left him there, wondering if he realized that in this family, truth was just another weapon in the arsenal, and I was finally learning how to use it. Victoria's lawyers arrived precisely at 9, their leather briefcases matching the mahogany conference table in Robert's study. I counted 4 of them, each wearing expressions that suggested they charged by the micro-expression. "Before we begin," Victoria said, settling into her chair like a queen ascending her throne, "I want to make it clear that this meeting is about protecting our family's interests." "Fascinating choice of words," Robert muttered, pouring himself a drink despite the early hour. "Considering your history with protection." I sat between Daniel and Marcus, who'd been granted a day pass from rehab. The air felt thick with unspoken accusations. "We have evidence," Victoria's lead lawyer began, sliding documents across the table, "that certain parties have been accessing private family records without authorization." Daniel's hand found mine under the table. I kept my face neutral, even as my pulse quickened. "Additionally," the lawyer continued, "there are concerns about potential breaches of confidentiality agreements regarding Marcus's previous situations." You mean my overdoses, Marcus said flatly. The ones Mother paid to keep out of the papers while telling everyone I was at boarding school? Victoria's perfectly painted lips tightened. We're trying to prevent further damage to this family's reputation. No, I heard myself say. You're trying to prevent damage to your reputation. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mrs. Brookside, we should discuss the terms of the proposed agreement. What agreement? Daniel interrupted. Victoria straightened, victory flickering in her eyes. A simple arrangement. Lucy signs a non-disclosure agreement, agrees to certain social parameters, and in exchange, receives a generous settlement. You're trying to buy me off? I'm trying to maintain order, Victoria snapped, before your little vendetta destroys everything I've built. Robert laughed, a harsh sound. Everything you've built? Tell them about Charles Joyce, Victoria. Tell them how you really secured the funding for Daniel's company. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Victoria's face went pale. That's not relevant. Charles Joyce, Robert continued, ignoring her, was my best friend and business partner. He died believing I'd betrayed him, never knowing Victoria had orchestrated the whole thing. Daniel stood abruptly. What are you talking about? Your mother needed seed money for your tech startup. Charles refused to invest unless I was involved. So Victoria arranged things, forged documents, destroyed relationships, all to ensure you'd have your success story. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Everything I did, she whispered, was for this family. No, Marcus said. Everything you did was for control. I watched Victoria's facade crack, just slightly, and felt a sudden, unexpected pang of recognition. How many times had I justified my own recent actions with similar reasoning? The agreement, Victoria's lawyer pressed on, includes provisions for— I don't want your money, I interrupted, or your silence. I want the truth. Victoria's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw real fear in them. You have no idea what truth costs in our world. Then teach me, I challenged. Tell them about Marcus's trust fund, about Charles Joyce, about every lie you've told to maintain your perfect image. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Daniel looked between his mother and me, his face a study in conflicting loyalties. If you do this, Victoria said softly, there's no going back, for any of us. I thought about my flower shop in Willow Creek, about the simple life I'd led before entering this world of power plays and hidden agendas, about how revenge had started to change me, reshaping my edges to match Victoria's sharp corners. Maybe that's what this family needs, I said. No more going back, only forward with the truth. Victoria stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Then you leave me no choice. She nodded to her lawyers. Proceed with the other option. As they pulled out new documents, I caught Robert's eye. He gave me a slight nod, and I understood. This was the moment he'd warned me about. The point where Victoria would reveal her true nature, not just to me, but to everyone she claimed to protect. The game was changing, and I wasn't sure anymore if winning meant becoming exactly what I'd set out to destroy. The Brookside Country Club's annual charity gala buzzed with whispers as I entered on Daniel's arm. 3 months of careful planning had led to this moment. Victoria stood across the room, holding court among her usual sycophants, but I noticed how her eyes kept darting toward the entrance. She was waiting for Marcus. Are you sure about this? Daniel whispered, his hand tense against my back. I smiled at a passing socialite. Ask your mother that question. The Charles Joyce Memorial Foundation banner hung prominently above the stage, a detail I'd specifically requested when joining the event committee. Victoria had fought it, of course, but Robert's influence still carried weight. Lucy, darling. Margaret Joyce, Charles's widow, embraced me. Her voice carried just enough to turn heads. I can't thank you enough for suggesting we honor Charles tonight. Victoria never mentioned him in previous years. Victoria's circle shifted uncomfortably. I watched her grip tighten on her champagne glass. Mrs. Joyce, Robert appeared beside us. I believe you haven't met my son Marcus? The room stilled. Marcus stood in the doorway, clean-shaven and wearing a suit that matched his brother's. Victoria's carefully crafted narrative of her troubled, absent son was walking proof of her lies. Actually, Marcus said clearly, we've met before, at the rehabilitation center Mother donated to, right after she had me committed against my will. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria started forward, but Elena, working as a volunteer server tonight, accidentally on purpose, stepped into her path with a tray of drinks. Marcus, Victoria's voice carried that familiar warning tone. You're not well. I'm 6 months sober, Mother. No thanks to you. He turned to Margaret Joyce. Did you know your husband tried to help me? Before he died, he was going to expose. That's enough! Victoria's command cracked like a whip, but Margaret Joyce stepped forward, her social smile gone brittle. No, Victoria. Let him speak. I'd love to hear what my husband was trying to expose before his convenient accident. The whispers grew louder. I watched Victoria's carefully constructed world start to crumble, feeling a surge of satisfaction that turned to ash in my mouth when I saw Daniel's face. Lucy, he said quietly, what have you done? Before I could answer, Victoria played her final card. If we're sharing family secrets, she announced, her voice carrying that deadly calm, perhaps we should discuss the real reason behind Lucy's interest in our family's affairs. Show them the envelope, dear. She pulled out a familiar-looking envelope, identical to the one I'd given Marcus with Robert's letters. My blood ran cold. What's she talking about? Daniel asked. Victoria's smile turned predatory. Did you really think you were the first person to try destroying me with the truth, Lucy? Ask your mother about the summer she spent working for Charles Joyce. Ask her why she left Brookside so suddenly 29 years ago. The room spun. 29 years. A year before I was born. Victoria, Robert warned, but she was already moving in for the kill. Your precious small-town parents have their own secrets, dear. Your father Henry isn't... Stop! The word came out like a gunshot. I hadn't realized I'd spoken until every head turned toward me. In that moment, I saw myself reflected in Victoria's eyes. The same calculated fury, the same ruthless determination to win at any cost. I'd become so focused on exposing her lies that I'd missed how the truth could destroy more than just our target. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Victoria and me. Enough, Mother, you've lost. Have I? She looked around the room, at the society vultures eagerly feeding on every word. Or have I just shown everyone exactly who they're dealing with? A daughter of scandal, playing at revenge without understanding the true cost? The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd started this to expose Victoria's manipulation of truth, only to discover I was part of a bigger lie I'd never suspected. Daniel touched my arm, his expression unreadable. We need to talk. Yes, I said, finally understanding what Robert had tried to warn me about. We all do. The storm I'd gathered was breaking, but I wasn't sure anymore who would be left standing when it cleared. Victoria might be exposed, but her last revelation had ensured mutual destruction. I'd wanted justice. Instead, I'd opened a door that couldn't be closed, and behind it lay truths that threatened to destroy not just Victoria's carefully constructed world, but my own foundations as well. The truth hit like shattered glass, each piece reflecting a different lie. My parents sat across from me in our living room, their familiar faces suddenly strange. Daniel stood by the window, as far from everyone as the room would allow. We were going to tell you, Mom said, her hands twisting in her lap, when the time was right. 28 years wasn't enough time? My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Dad, Henry, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and build birdhouses, who'd walked me down the aisle, looked at me with eyes full of love and fear. Lucy, you're my daughter. Biology doesn't change that. No, I said. Victoria's revelation at the gala changed that. The doorbell rang. Daniel answered it, letting in Robert and Marcus. Victoria swept in behind them, uninvited but inevitable, like a storm cloud following the wind. Well, she said, surveying our little family tragedy, shall we discuss Charles Joyce? Victoria, Mom started, but Victoria cut her off. Tell them, Martha. Tell them how you worked as Charles's assistant that summer. how you fell in love with him, how you disappeared when his wife found out, carrying a secret that would destroy multiple families. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Stop. But isn't this what you wanted? Victoria's voice dripped false concern. The truth, no matter the cost? Charles Joyce was your father, Lucy. The man whose death I supposedly orchestrated, the very weapon you tried to use against me, was your biological father. Daniel made a sound like he'd been hit. The implications crashed through the room. I'd unknowingly married my half-brother's half-brother. The family I'd tried to destroy was, by blood, partially my own. You knew, I said to Victoria. All this time, you knew. Of course I knew. I know everything that threatens my family, including naive little florists with revenge fantasies. That's enough. Robert stepped forward. Victoria, you've made your point. Have I? She turned to Daniel. Your wife orchestrated tonight's public humiliation of our family. She conspired with Marcus, turned you against me, all while hiding her own connection to the Joyce scandal. I didn't know, I whispered, but the words felt hollow. The board members who witnessed tonight's spectacle are questioning your judgment, Daniel. Your company's stock will reflect that tomorrow. Everything you've built, everything your father and I sacrificed for, tainted by association. Daniel wouldn't look at me. The distance between us felt infinite. Lucy? Mom reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't. The room was spinning. I can't. I fled to the garden, the one place that still made sense. But even here, among my carefully tended flowers, Victoria's victory followed. You understand now, don't you? She'd followed me out. How truth is just another weapon, and weapons don't care who they hurt. I turned to face her, really seeing her for the first time. Did you kill him, Charles Joyce? Does it matter? The man you tried to avenge was just as flawed as the woman you tried to destroy. She stepped closer. We're more alike than you think, Lucy. Both willing to burn down everything for what we believe is right. I'm nothing like you. No? She gestured toward the house. Look what your quest for justice has achieved. Your marriage, your family, your identity, all sacrificed on the altar of revenge. Just like I sacrificed everything to protect what I built. The worst part was, she was right. I'd become so focused on exposing her lies that I'd ignored the cost to everyone else. Daniel's company, Marcus's recovery, my parents' marriage. I'd risked it all for revenge. Victoria moved to leave, then paused. There's still a way to salvage this. Sign the papers my lawyers prepared. Agree to a quiet divorce. Take the settlement. Disappear back to your small town. Let your husband and his company recover from this scandal. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure everyone knows the full story. Every detail about Charles Joyce, your mother's affair, the questionable legitimacy of your marriage. I'll burn down everything you love, just like you tried to burn down everything I built. She left me there, among the flowers that no longer brought comfort. Inside, I could see Daniel talking with his lawyer, Mom crying in Dad's arms, Marcus watching it all with haunted eyes. I'd wanted to expose Victoria's true nature. Instead, I'd become a reflection of it, destroying the very things I'd sought to protect. The night air carried the scent of roses, the same flowers I'd arranged for my wedding. Back when I thought love was stronger than revenge. I'd never been more wrong. Margaret Joyce's private study felt like a tomb, filled with ghosts of secrets long buried. She placed a leather-bound journal on the desk between us, her hand steady despite what we were about to do. Charles kept records of everything, she said, including the real cause of Victoria's rise to power. Victoria sat across from us, her lawyer hovering nervously beside her. Daniel and Marcus flanked the doorway, while Robert stood behind his ex-wife's chair, a silent reminder of everything she'd lost. This is harassment, Victoria's lawyer started, but she silenced him with a wave. Let them play their final card, she said. Though I wonder, Lucy, if you're prepared for what that means for your mother. I thought of Mom, waiting at home with Dad, Henry, the man who'd chosen to love me despite knowing the truth. This isn't about my mother anymore. Margaret opened the journal. Charles discovered irregularities in the company finances, money being funneled through shell corporations, all leading back to one source. Careful, Victoria's voice carried a tremor beneath its steel. You're treading dangerous ground. The night before his accident, Margaret continued, Charles called Robert about evidence he'd found. Evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and something far worse. Victoria laughed, but it sounded hollow. And you waited all these years to mention this? I waited until someone was brave enough to stand up to you. Or stupid enough. Margaret looked at me. I'm still not sure which. Show them, I said quietly. Margaret turned the journal around. Victoria's face went ash white as she recognized her own signature on documents dated 25 years ago. You didn't just steal from the company, Robert said. You orchestrated Charles's accident because he discovered your connection to Marcus's father's death. The room went still. Marcus stepped forward, his rehabilitation-steadied hands shaking now. What? Your father threatened to expose Victoria's early frauds, Robert explained. His car accident was no accident, just like Charles's wasn't. Victoria stood so quickly her chair toppled. You can't prove any of this. The police reopened both cases this morning, Margaret said. Charles's journal provides enough evidence for a full investigation. You're destroying this family, Victoria spat at me. Everything I built. You built it on corpses, Marcus cut in. My father's, Charles Joyce's, my life when you had me committed to hide your guilt. I built it for him, Victoria pointed at Daniel, her composure finally shattering. Everything I did was to secure his future. The company, the connections, the power. All of it to ensure he'd never know what it means to be powerless. Daniel stepped into the light. And what about Marcus? What about Lucy's father? Were their lives worth my success? Yes, Victoria whispered, and in that moment, I saw something break behind her eyes. A mother protects her child, no matter the cost. No, I said, standing. A mother loves her child. There's a difference. My father, Charles, died trying to expose the truth. The man who raised me lived that truth every day, loving me despite knowing I wasn't his. You didn't protect Daniel. You taught him that power matters more than people. Victoria turned to her son, reaching for him, but Daniel stepped back. The board meeting tomorrow, he said. I'm announcing a full audit and cooperation with the investigation. You'll lose everything. No, Mother, I'll lose what you built on lies, but I'll keep what matters. His eyes met mine across the room, and for the first time since the gala, I saw my husband instead of Victoria's son. It's over, Victoria, Robert said gently. The truth always surfaces eventually. Victoria looked around the room at Marcus's pain, Daniel's resolve, Margaret's quiet triumph, and something shifted in her expression. The mask cracked completely, revealing not a monster, but a broken woman who'd lost her way decades ago. The truth, she said softly, almost to herself. Do you want to know the truth, Lucy? I saw myself in you. That same fire, that determination to protect what you love. It terrified me. She turned to Margaret. I'll confess. To everything. But not for your justice or your revenge. For my sons. Both of them. As the lawyer led Victoria out to meet the waiting detectives, I felt no triumph. Only a hollow understanding of how easily the pursuit of justice could become a quest for power and how revenge could corrupt even the purest intentions. Daniel touched my hand. We have our own truth to face. Yes, I said, thinking of all the broken pieces we had to either mend or sweep away. We do. The war was over, but the real work of healing was just beginning. The prison visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and regret. Victoria sat across from me, her designer outfit replaced by standard issue gray, but her spine still straight as ever. Daniel's company survived the audit, I said, placing my hands on the cold metal table. He's rebuilding it, the right way this time. She nodded slightly. And Marcus? 6 months sober, he and Daniel have weekly dinners. I paused. They both asked about you. Something flickered across her face. Pain or pride, I couldn't tell anymore. And you? Why are you here? I pulled out the small photo I'd brought. Victoria's hands trembled as she took it. My flower shop, I explained. I'm expanding into the old Joyce building. Margaret thought Charles would have wanted that. The photo showed the renovated storefront, its windows filled with arrangements. The sign read, Second Chances Floristry. Fitting, Victoria said softly, though I doubt I'm meant to be one of those second chances. No, but understanding you might help me avoid becoming you. She looked up sharply. And have you? Understood? I thought about the past year, about revenge and righteousness, about how easy it was to justify cruelty in the name of justice. I understand that protecting something doesn't mean destroying everything else. A lesson I learned too late. She traced the photo's edge. You know, I truly believed I was doing the right thing. Every lie, every manipulation, it was all for a greater purpose, until the purpose became the lies themselves. And now? Now I sit here, counting cinder blocks and wondering which was the exact moment, where protection became poison. A guard signaled 5 minutes remaining. I stood, but Victoria's voice stopped me. Lucy, that night at your wedding, I saw myself in you, not just the determination or the strength, but the potential for what I became. That's why I tried to break you. I know, I said. That's why I had to break you back. She smiled, sad and genuine. We could have been magnificent allies. We could have been family. The word hung between us, heavy with what-ifs and never-weres. Victoria straightened her prison-issued jacket, a ghost of her old dignity. Tell my sons, she started, then stopped. No, I've lost the right to send messages. They'll find their own truth now. Outside, Daniel waited by the car. He didn't ask about the visit, just like I didn't ask about his weekly calls to the prison that he thought I didn't know about. Some healing happened in silence. At home, I found Elena arranging flowers in our kitchen. Your parents are in the garden, she said. Henry's building that new trellis. I watched through the window as my father, because that's what he'd always be, showed Mom how to secure a climbing rose. Their love had weathered the storm of truth and emerged stronger. Some foundations, I'd learned, were built on more than blood. The doorbell rang. Marcus stood on the porch, 6-month sobriety chip glinting in his hand. Thought you might want to see this, he said, since you're partly responsible. For your recovery or your mother's downfall? Both. Neither, he shrugged. For showing me there's a difference between justice and vengeance, though I'm still figuring out where that line is. Let me know when you do, I said. I'm still looking for it myself. That evening, as Daniel and I walked through our garden, I stopped at the rose bushes I'd planted after Victoria's arrest. White blooms tinged with crimson at their hearts. Beautiful, complicated things that thrived in the aftermath of destruction. Sometimes I wonder, Daniel said, touching a petal, if we're just echoes of our parents' choices. No, I replied. We're the lessons they failed to learn. He took my hand, and we stood there among the roses that bore witness to both vengeance and redemption. Somewhere in Brookside, Margaret Joyce was probably reading her husband's journal again. In a prison cell, Victoria was perhaps counting her regrets. And here, in this garden, I was learning that the hardest truth wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about how victory sometimes felt like loss, how revenge could hollow out the heart that harbored it, and how forgiveness, real forgiveness, was the most difficult bloom to cultivate. But I had time. And unlike Victoria, I had finally learned the difference between growing something and destroying it.